On an earlier episode of Low Bug Garage, I got my snowmobile running, and then I broke it. Yeah, I snapped them all off. The seat fell off along the way. The machine did have some issues already. Bearing is rusted solid on there. So I did some upgrades. Well, I upgraded my clamping system to baling wire, so we're all set with the fuel tank. Good enough. That's always a good sign. Seems like it's going to work fine. And then this happened. Now that my snowmobile is broken, the forecast said there might be snow this weekend. So I'm going to take a crack at fixing this and see if I can get it running before there is snow. The big problem is the drive sprockets. New ones are only 20 bucks. Now, I just got to install them. Never done this before, so it should be interesting. There, now I can get to the track. Now those sprockets are really buried in, so let's figure out how to get them out of there. There's some adjusters in there, but these wheels look really easy to remove. This is the kind of thing where it'd be smart to figure out how you're supposed to do it before just taking parts off. So I'm just going to take parts off and see what happens. Well, let's try a hammer. There still seems to be a lot of tension here. Oh, the seat fell off along the way. Apparently the seat base wasn't structurally sound. We're just going to pop these out of here and see what falls out. Doesn't seem to want to come off. Let's look at the other side. That looks less easy to get to. I think I'm going to need to make myself a little more clearance here to see what's going on. We'll just pop this off and see if that helps. Now I expect this will give me lots of room. Not as much as I'd hoped. Wonder what else I can remove to see this better. Let's see if pulling this out will help with our clearance here. Now there's definitely more room. A lot of junk in the bottom here. This is a good way to clean your snowmobile, just remove the engine. It really makes it more simple. I'm hoping I can pull it out in one shot and not have to disassemble it internally. Alright, it's wiggling. That's a good sign. Doesn't seem to be coming off. Yep, there we go. So that saved a lot of time by snapping off completely. And that looks like a cotter bin holding it on. That housing was what was holding that bearing in, and that whole shaft was riding in that housing. There might have been a simpler way to do this, but we got to it. I still can't really get it to move. I really think I need more slack here. There we go. Ooh, those bearings are bad. Let's just ignore that. They still turn. But now, this is what I was looking for. Maybe just rusted on. Try to get the back side of these idler wheels to pop those loose. There, yes. It's almost like this thing is 40 years old. Or older. There we go. Yep, bearing is rusted solid on there and doesn't really turn well. I got the bearings freed up and turning, but I don't know if they're really good. Try the other side. Just let me know in the comments. Replace or don't replace. It's getting cooler and the clouds are starting to roll in. So there is a possibility I might have a small amount of snow to use this on. Now these sprockets are plastic with a metal backing and then sandwiched with another metal plate. So I got to separate those rivets in order to get this thing apart. That one, the head started spinning. So I'm going to use the pliers, put a little bit of pressure on the back side of the head. Now with the rivets out, this whole plate can move. I can't take it off with the bearing in the way. So it looks like that has to come off. Not a battery. Ready? This battery's dead too? Man, cold weather and batteries do not mix. Ah, finally got this one apart. That's a nice tight fit. That's good. I put it back together using bolts instead of rivets because I didn't have any rivets, and I had bolts. Now I could very easily put the old engine back in. There were only 4 bolts to remove it. It came out really easy. I've been thinking about this. Even though it's not particularly powerful as far as modern snowmobiles go, it was pretty quick. And the chassis didn't handle particularly well. You could easily overdrive that chassis. When I got it, there was a lot of fiberglass work on the hood, putting it back together to attest the fact it's really easy to crash that thing. I've had quite a number of close calls myself on it. It's small and it's light, which leads to some of the issues. What happens if I put less power into it? If this thing had less than 10 horsepower and lower gearing, I could let my kids loose on it and let them just drive as much as they want. They can hold it wide open, it wouldn't be an issue. And that could be a good thing. Now let's see what I have lying around that I can work with. I put something under here, probably over a decade ago. There we are. It's a little 5 or 6 horsepower engine. Oh, I see the recoil starter's broken also, but it has an electric starter. Let's see what we can do with this thing. I know this can work because the first snowmobile I ever drove had a lawnmower type engine. There's me in the driver's seat, unhappy to be stopped for a picture. That is the driven side. Now I need to find the belt to that thing. That might be the belt. Old 240Z part. Have the twin SUs go to a turbo. I'll never use that again. There's another belt with different weights for the clutch. Now I'm laying out my pieces here to see how this could work. This engine turns this way. I need to have the pulley on that side in order for the whole unit to go forward. I'm going to try to remove this driven pulley off the chain drive housing, and it has a hole straight through it that had this roll pin in it. So I figured if I drive the roll pin out, that spring will just push it right off. But obviously that didn't work because the roll pin's out. I'm thinking it was held in by the roll pin and rust, and I have the rust left to go. Oh. That does not want to come off easily. Wonder if this is going to come flying off when it loosens up. Hopefully not. That's always a good sign. Feels like it's moving. Oh yeah, that's just going right off now. There we go. I think we're moving more. Let's see what we got inside here. Oh, tapered bearings. That doesn't look like it's going to separate easy. Now I'm not seeing any attachments, roll pins, set screws, anything like that holding this piece of the clutch onto that shaft, which means that will not be fun to remove. So let's not remove it. Let's just put this all right back together again. At least now we know what's inside there. I got this in the vise. I'm going to get that broken bolt out of there. Just going to expand the housing a little bit first. A little oil. There we go. That's getting the right heat range. I actually see the threads wiggling a little. We're just going to fill this whole thing up with penetrating oil. I'm going to let that sit overnight. Last night I filled that hole up with penetrating oil. In the morning, it's all leaked out on the floor, which means the oil had to go through these threads to get out. So that thing's got to be ready to come out now. There we go. So what's your guess? You think I'm going to use new bearings? I actually hadn't planned on it, but these are open on one side and sealed on the other, which means you need to keep oil on the side that's open. And I'm not sure how I'm going to end up doing this. I might replace the entire gear case, in which case I want a double sealed bearing. So I looked up the number. Brand new ones are only $5. They're double sealed. It actually was cheaper to get the ones with the snap rings on them, I can just take that off. $5 a piece, permanently lubricated. It's going to get new bearings. Now I need to go through my miscellaneous sprocket pile and find something I can make this work with. A lot of the stuff here is number 50. I think the sprocket that's already on it is number 40. And that's looking number 40 like. Wrong pitch on that one. That looks like the right pitch, but it's on a electric clutch. I don't remember what that came from. There's got to be something in here that'll work. That's why you hoard things. Maybe. That is seriously worn out, but it's roughly the right size. Since there's no good center hole here for a pilot, I'm just grinding the heads off. Then once I get them flush to the surface, just punch them out. Now I can remove this piece. If I ever want to, I can reinstall it just by putting new rivets in. Right now, I've got a nice flat drive flange. So all I have to do is make my sprocket fit that. I put the track system back together. That all went fine. I've got the box back in place here. Chains in place. Now before I button this up, I wanted to show you this because it's kind of neat. There's a 2-tensioner system. Now normally on chain drives, you've got a tensioner on the slack side. The engine would be spinning over this way, and this side would have tension, this side would be slack. You can see when I drive it forward, it does that. But this also has a brake on it. And when this disc clamps, the tension goes the other way. And there's always a tensioner on the slack side, no matter which way the force is going. But now, I'm going to button it up, then we can go on to fitting the engine. On this shaft assembly, the sprocket's on the opposite side of the pulley. I actually want that sprocket to be over there. So I'm going to see if I can just switch it over and put both on one side. I'm going to switch to the mushroom the end of the threads over style hammer. There we go. Got the shaft out, and unfortunately it's not keyed all the way through. We just have a keyway on either end. I lined up with the original keyway. I'm just going to extend it a little bit. Now we've got a little bit of extra keyway to work with. This pulley fits on a lot further, and I've got enough extra length to put my sprocket on outboard of this pulley. I've got my whole assembly together, my sprocket's right where I want it. So I'm not going to use it. By putting this sprocket way out past the bearing, I've created a long lever arm that it's pulling on. Now keep in mind, every time you deal with chains and sprockets are always pulling towards each other every time you put tension on the chain. So I want to go with a bigger sprocket here. I had a lot more number 50 stuff, and I've got a number 50 sprocket that has the right diameter to fit perfectly on that shaft. The twisting motion of the shaft is transmitted through the sprocket to the chain and pulls on the chain. And that goes back to pull on the other sprocket and twist that one. Now in the case of my number 40 10-tooth sprocket, it's pretty small. If we're talking 10 foot-pounds, which would be 120 inch-pounds, would work out to about 130 pounds of force on this chain. Now by going to a number 50 sprocket, they're larger. Even though it's only a few teeth bigger, it's a lot bigger in diameter. The radius that torque is acting on is a lot larger, so the force pulling the chain is less. I want to get that chain as close as possible. Let's see if it fits this way. Put a spacer behind it though. That might do it. Doesn't matter if it's square, does it? Oh yeah, that'll be a tight fit. That looks like it's going to work okay. There's a tiny little bit of a gap between the chain and the other pulley. I think we're in good shape there. Now that I'm going with a bigger drive sprocket, I can go with a bigger driven sprocket. I can use this big one. And that's, I think it's around 44 teeth. That one's 13, which will give me a little over 3-to-1. Now I just got to get my alignment, which of course hits the steering shaft. Let's take a big chunk out. That's better. Looks like that motor plate is in about the right position, but I need to get a little more exact now. So let's figure out how we're going to make this go to that. Let's go to this scrap metal pile and see. This is the organized stuff here. When I was digging the other day, ran across these circles. Ah, that is, whoops. That looks quite promising. My lathe isn't big enough. I gotta grab the outside and make a circle on the inside. Came up with this setup. A few hexagon spacers under there holding it up. We should be able to cut a circle out this way. Now I didn't actually line this up, so I'm just doing a test cut to figure out what diameter I'm cutting. Now this should be pretty close to the actual diameter I need. I was shooting for 4 inches, I'm about 30 under, so I'm gonna take a cleanup pass. Now I'm a tiny bit over, but I'm okay with that. Now I couldn't grab the outside with this lathe, but when I have a hole in the middle, I can move the jaws outwards and grab the inside. So now I can make sure that the outside is exactly concentric with the inside. That is way too fast. The back gears are pretty worn out, but I got them engaged, and we'll see if this works better. Well, it's turning. I took a flat plate of metal, clamped the inner ring, clamped the sprocket, and welded the two together. Looks pretty decent on this side. Oops. I'm glad I had a little extra clearance on that ID, because with the welding, it warped slightly, and now it fits perfect. I'm going to use the old pulley, which already has the right bolt holes, to mark that one. First I'm going to mark where they are, because I'm about to cover them up. I did staggered welds so I could drill the bolt holes in between. So we're going to line those up through these little windows here. So now I know my bolt holes are right there, and I won't be running into a weld. Now I've got the center holes lined up. I can mark all my hole locations. Got my sprocket all drilled out, bolted right on. Now I'm working on my chain alignment. Looks like everything's aligned pretty nicely, so that's not a bad position. I've got some 1.5 by 1.5 spacers to hold it in place. The bolts that hold this whole chain box on, those holes are slotted. This whole thing will move back and forth. So there's my chain adjustment. I can lock that plate in place because I don't need to move it. What are we hitting? Looks like the hood is hitting that starter. That could be an issue. The only reason I have these 1.5 inch spacers here, because that front edge is hitting. But that front edge isn't doing anything useful. Pretty much this whole section, no point in leaving that attached. By taking off the front of that plate, I was able to drop this down quite a bit. I got rid of those spacers entirely, and I'm touching on a point there, a point there. On the other side, I got a couple points here, and I can connect it to the front here. That dropped that electric starter down quite a bit. Looks like we got the hood fitting okay. Now I'm going to use a straight edge to check my alignment and put it on the sprocket. Looks like we're lined up right on the edge, so that looks straight. Checking for level this way, and that looks pretty reasonable too. The belt clearance is tight, but I think I can squeeze it through. The chain is just a little bit off the tunnel here, so that's okay. I think we might have a position. Originally I intended on making this entirely bolt-in. That way if I ever wanted to go back, I have all the parts, I could just bolt them right back. But I'm kind of feeling good about this. I think it's going to stay like this, and I just want to get this done. So I could make a bunch of brackets to bolt that on, but I think I'm just going to use some liquid metal to hold it together. It's a little tighter than I wanted, but it's going to wear and get looser, and I still have room to move the engine forward. There's a tiny bit of slack, there's plenty of room, it's not hitting. This belt is real close to rubbing, but it's not, and as this one closes, that one opens, and that belt goes upwards. So we're good there. Drivetrain wise, this thing might go. Now I gotta get the engine running. Gotta figure out this wiring. Probably would have been smart to do before I installed it when I could actually get to it. 4 wires. Now my switch box has 5 wires coming out of it, but that one looks like it's probably a main power in. I already have battery connections set. That'll be perfect. I'm gonna go about 78% chance of this working. No sparks yet. That's a good sign. 2 on. Oh, did something. I grabbed the old gas tank, which had a primer on it, and the primer's still attached. And I'm going to pump the 2-stroke gas that's full of oil right into this engine. Because I figure, after sitting as long as it has, it probably could use the extra lubrication. This is a handy tool. Just pump the gas right in there. That is cranking really slow. Chain's off. This might turn easier now. Ah, we're almost there. Okay. I don't have a fuel tank plumbed in at all, so we're just running off what I pump in here. So I don't expect it to run very long, but at least we know the ignition's working. Now I need a fuel system. I'm remembering when I took this off, I think I had a carb issue then. And I'm pretty sure I decided to let future me worry about it. Unfortunately, now I'm future me, so I gotta fix that carb issue. First thing I'm gonna do is take the bowl off. A little bit of black gook on the bottom. That might be an issue. I'm gonna just try spraying some carb cleaner through the main jet and see if things get better. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything's going through the main jet, so let me pop that out of there. I tried to take out the main jet. All I did was chip the brass off it where the screwdriver was supposed to turn it. Now it's clogged and ruined. That's okay. I got a thin piece of wire here. We'll just leave it in place while we clean it. It flows now. So we're going to button this back together. Might run a little rich now, but that's okay. I've got the original fuel tank from this engine. It used to go right there. But there's no way that hood is going to close. So we're not putting that back on. Maybe I'll just mount it over here for now. Oh, that's rusty. There's the underside of the cap. That's not promising. Maybe I won't put it in there. I found a fuel tank that I'm pretty sure is clean, and I've got it securely mounted to the handlebars here. And that uses a 5/16 line. The engine uses a 3/16 line. Then I found this little valve. It's got a small barb on one end and 1/4-inch line on the other. Now we got a nice lump at the end, and that will seal up fine, probably. Let's open the valve and see what happens. My clamping system isn't very good. Did I say that was secure? I meant temporary. Temporary is the right word. Well, I've upgraded my clamping system to baling wire, so we're all set with the fuel tank. And I want to see those clutches operate. So let's try this again. I don't see anything happening there. So pop off this front cover here. This is the part that actually does the engaging and changing speed. See all that rust there? This piece is supposed to move in and out, but it's stuck. Now I gotta be a bit careful. You don't wanna bend the pulley edge. I'm trying to hold it right there on the main body and tap this out. Oh, just felt it move. You can see it's coming out now. There we go. Hey, good way to clean your finger. I'm gonna try using the flutes on the side of the drill bit to clean out that rust. That looks pretty good. I think we're ready to give this another shot. We do have a fuel leak. Oh well. Why isn't the starter working anymore? Okay, we have fuel pouring out of the engine, and the starter stopped working. Maybe I wasn't meant to try this today. I'm gonna try the button. Nothing. The problem is in the starter. Let's see how hard it is to fix this pole starter. I really want to see this go tonight. I see a rope in there. There's a bit of rope. This looked like a fine handle. We got a pole starter again. that's what it's supposed to do. I hooked the chain back up. Now the clutch freed up. I can turn over the engine and it doesn't spin everything. I want to see if it'll drive the track. Now before I get this spinning at speed, I want to put some oil in this chain drive. I don't know how much oil and I don't know what kind of oil. It's probably one of those things that's really easy to look up, and I bet a lot of you right now know offhand what it is. I don't. I recently filled up a rear end and I've got a little bit of 80-90 left over in the bottom of the bottle. In order to clean my shop, I'm just going to pour this in there. Then I can throw away the empty bottle. Should be around a pint or a little less. I think that'll be enough to get it splashing around. Now let's see if it'll move under its own power. Now that it works, it was time to take it apart and do a little cleanup. My favorite snowmobile that I've ever owned was a TNT 399, like these. Of course, mine didn't look like these. It was pieced together from a few different machines. That made me decide that all Ski-Doos should be yellow and black. Now, the entire seat base is completely rotted away in this machine, and the base is what attached it to the machine. So I figured having the seat attached is probably a good thing. Found a piece of plywood in my stash. It's already cut up pretty much the right length. I just have to trim off the side. I had to make the plywood fit the tabs in the chassis, and it was way too thick, and the tabs were square, so it took a little extra cutting. Good enough. The back of the seat was held on by 2 bolts here, going through this big rusted, ripped out area. I don't even have to get my hole locations right. As long as I get it close, I'll just put a big washer on the other side. Got my mounting holes drilled, and this whole surface is going to be covered up by the seat, so I'll never get to this again. So I have 2 mounting bolts, welded them to a bit of plate, so this can drop right in. Then I was thinking this whole plate might push away. So I drilled an extra hole. We're just going to attach this plate, and now that can't come off at all. So this will drop here, slide forward, bolts go in, now I can attach the upholstery. Final bolts, and the seat is done. I got the engine on the bench here so I can figure out what's going on with the starter issue and see if the switch is telling it to start. Yep, we're getting power to that circuit. Check and make sure we have power to the starter. Yep, we got that too. Do we have any power coming out of the solenoid when we turn it on? And nothing. The solenoid isn't sending the power to the starter motor, which is good because starter motors are more expensive. Solenoids are pretty cheap. But before we spend money, let's see if we can fix it. So first thing I'm going to do is put power straight to these wires and see if it clicks. Got the negative terminal on the negative post, hitting the positive terminal on. I'm not even seeing any sparks. Now these units are meant to be disposable and not be taken apart, so I'm going to take it apart. When they put these together, they have a metal housing, they slide the plastic in, and then they bend the metal housing over the plastic. That holds it nice and secure and permanently, so we're going to have to deform that back outwards in order to get this apart. Taking a small screwdriver, trying to wiggle my way under there and be able to bend that thing. Well, there it goes. Now, we can take this end piece off. Come on, there we go. This is the coil that moves the plunger when you hit the key. These are the contacts that send power to the starter motor. One of these small internal wires is disconnected. While I was trying to figure out how to fix one connection, the other connection broke. I'm going to take this opportunity to make sure the whole coil works. I'm going to hold one end on a negative post, the other end going to a positive. Oops, let's point it a different direction. This is what happens inside a solenoid. You turn on the key, puts power to these small wires, and that moves the plunger, and that makes the big connector turn on and off. So all I have to do is get these 2 wires to connect to the external wires, and we can fix this thing. I need to connect to these 2 wires, and they're in little holes where the solder connection is actually sunk inside the plastic. And I can't get to that, so I gotta make myself some room. Wires are out. Now I can slide these wires through those holes so I can give myself slack for the soldering, then pull it back as I assemble it. I actually broke off a couple little plastic tabs on this spool, slid the wires up inside next to the coil, and soldered them together. Now I'm going to wrap a piece of electrical tape around it to make sure those don't hit the case. We can put it together. I've got a punch with a little bitty chisel end ground into it for stuff like this. Now for what really matters, do we get the click? We got an electric starter again. I took apart the original box for the starter switch, and I found it has a starter switch, a circuit breaker, and not sure. There we go. Now the Snowmobile already had clips fiberglassed in for holding their wiring harness, so you use that to hold these floppy bits so they're not quite as floppy. Just have to extend these wires. I run through more of the original clips and to the engine. I got the wires all in and extended, hooked up to the engine. I also hooked up the original brake, and the old belt guard works pretty well as a chain guard. Even though this is going way slower than it did before, it couldn't hurt to have this little extra protection. But before it runs, I'm gonna need to hook up a fuel system. I ran this before, I got the carburetor working, but it just leaked all over the place. Looks like it needs at least a needle and seat to keep it from overflowing. So I looked up the price of a needle and seat, found out these carburetors are so cheap, there's no point in replacing parts. But there's no point in buying this carburetor, because performance carburetors are also dirt cheap. So I got one of those. And not just for the performance, there's something else that caught my eye. The shape of it. This is the original carburetor off the Snowmobile. This is a slide style carburetor with a throttle cable going right in the top. So is this one. So I'm hoping by buying this carburetor, I'm able to hook up this throttle cable and go with the original setup. I want a little more room to work right in this area. And this exhaust is in the way and points the wrong direction. So we're just gonna remove it for now, figure out what to do about it later. And musical pulleys. I'm not gonna need the governor anymore. Oops. That's better. You start to be able to see the actual engine parts now. So here's the throttle cable in the old carburetor. That's pretty tiny. I can make the cable fit the carburetor, but then I had a thought. The carburetor used to be over here. I put it in position on the throttle. That's as far as it goes. My new carburetor is gonna be over there. There is no way I can use this cable. Looks like this thing has the right throttle cable I need. I bought it for a different project, but I don't even know if I'm gonna need the throttle cable at all. And I know I need one now. So we're just gonna steal that. Well, I'm at it. I wonder if I'm gonna use this exhaust. That might work. The manifold doesn't fit. I don't know if you can see in the bottom of the hole, there's a little ridge right on this bottom edge. Looks like they drilled it in 2 steps. They went through with a small drill, then came back with a bigger drill, and the bigger drill didn't go far enough. I'm going a few thousandths oversized anyway, just in case. With manufacturing like this, who knows if they got the location right too. Yeah, while I'm at it, I think we're gonna drill a hole right in the side. The reason I drilled a hole right through the side of my brand new manifold is I need to add a port, because I want to tap some manifold vacuum. Something like that. In order to run the stock fuel tank, the original setup had a pump, but this is meant for a 2-stroke. It's ported into the crankcase that has both pressure and vacuum. On 4-stroke lawnmower type engines, they don't have the pressure side, but they do have a vacuum signal. And some have a fuel pump. And they're pretty cheap. I bought this one for around $8. They came with a fuel filter. Then I saw this one. This one has a metal housing, and it said it eliminates the fuel leaks that are common with plastic pumps. I don't know if fuel leaks are that common in the plastic pumps. I haven't actually seen one, but it was only $12. And I figure under the hood here, you'll never see a leak. And with kids riding it, that could be a big problem. That throttle cable fit the carburetor perfectly, but it was a little short up top here. So I made a little wire extension, and it seems like it's going to work fine. I took the old exhaust, cut off the flange, took that ATV pipe, chopped it up into little sections, decided the muffler from the ATV was too big. It would look kind of cool as a side pipe, but it really didn't fit well underneath the hood. So I bought a cheap replacement muffler for standard Briggs & Stratton type stuff. It happens to fit perfectly inside that pipe. And this one looks like a lot better size. So now I've got to take this pile of pieces and turn it into an exhaust system. Twisting up a little piece of steel in order to make a brace. Because of the length of the pipe, I don't want the end to be bouncing around. It's tacked up. Now I can weld it up. Now, as long as you ignore my really bad welds, I think we have a pretty decent little exhaust system. I think this will work well. One thing I want to point out on this flange, I did not weld it all the way around on the outside because this pipe is way bigger than the original one and I'm already real close on bolt clearance. Instead I welded it on the inside, now I got to grind that flat. But it'll seal and we should be able to still bolt it on. That's important. I was able to get those bolts in, no problem. And the exhaust is in, brace is attached, and it sticks out the bottom just like the original. Now I think I'm done welding. Let's put some gas in this and see what happens. This engine is going to be a lot easier on fueling too because there's no more pre-mixing. Just straight gas. I'm going to test the carb and the exhaust and see if this thing runs again. Maybe. Well, the fuel pump's doing something. That's good. I'll have to get to the carburetor doing something and we're in good shape here. Put it up on a jack stand, that way I can let the engine rev a little and the track will just spin. Won't drive away on me. I almost forgot about this. I got a battery. I got the cheapest one Walmart sells and has a picture of the Snowmobile on the front. I went for the expensive power sports type because these are sealed, and if my kids drive snowmobiles like I used to, it's going to end up on its side at least once. I'd rather not have acid dripping out of it. This snowmobile originally had a toolbox, and it's just about the right size for the battery. Just had to put a little bit of padding on either end. I opened up some holes in the ends, took a piece of 1/4-inch threaded rod and bent it. Then I'm going to take a piece of tubing. Any old tubing will do. Happen to have a lot of this stuff lying around. We'll slide that over the threaded rod. Now I cut it to length and bent the other end. We'll just slide them in those holes. There we are. Now I put a nut on either end of the threaded rod. As I bolt it down, it pulls it in, and that battery's held in there securely. I've got my recoil starter here. It does work, but I had stolen the clip from the belt guard in order to make a handle. Now I got to replace that because I need it for the belt guard. I went and got one with a big handle and new rope. That way it's easy to use with gloved hands, and hopefully I can run it in the stock location. The only real trick to this is pull your cord out all the way so it's easy to get to the knot, and then jam something in there so it doesn't spin back. Now if you need to give it a few extra turns to get a little more spring pressure, this is a good time to do it. There we go. Let's feed the new rope in. And back she goes. Let's leave that pile there. We'll cut it once we get it installed. Before I put this recoil starter on, I just want you to take a quick look. If you've never taken one of these engines apart before, you may not realize those blades there are the cooling fan. It sucks air in here, then goes through this shroud and blows it out over the fins. That's going to become important shortly. I rotated it one set of holes over to move the rope down a bit, give me a little more clearance in the carb. There we go. I also discovered one other important thing. I can't shut this engine off. Apparently this box that I left floating around needs to go to ground in order to shut the engine off. I'm going to add a ground now. Now we're all ready to hop on and drive. Everything will work. But not for very long. Because remember, this engine is fan cooled, and that hot air is just going to keep going around and around and around once I have this hood closed. So that engine is going to overheat as is. We need a source of cool air. On the old engine, that was accomplished by blowing the hot air out the top of the hood. I found an old piece of dryer ducting. I got an end cap. I'm going to do something along this line on the intake side.
The metal was a little too thin for a hole saw, but tin snips worked fine.
Made a notch for the pull starter rope. So this will go here. Something along those lines. Make some index marks. Now I need to turn this end into a flange so I can mount it to the flat surface. So Just make a lot of little cuts here. Then take all these tabs and bend them out. Wait, don't bend them out yet. I'm going to put them through the piece I want them to go through. It's through, now I can bend these over. It'll be something like that. I'm just riveting every other one of these pedals. I think that'll be fine. Really doesn't need to be particularly strong. And there we go. We got our piece together. Found some scraps of aluminum under my shear. I'm gonna make a few brackets to attach this thing. I'm guessing wildly on the hole locations, but I'm gonna match drill it, so wild guesses are totally accurate. Got tabs made up that attach it to the shroud, so that's on there fine. There we go, we got fresh air to the engine. There's a lot of air going in. Never had a electric start snowmobile before. Fancy. I found two problems. One, the jetting's not quite right, and two, gravel's no fun to drive a snowmobile on. Let's fix both those. Oh, I'm off the ground. Oh, that's perfect. Had to go over 8,000 feet in elevation, but we got snow. Now the carburetor is acting a bit lean, but now that I'm at a higher elevation, so far so good.
Everything seemed to work great. The clutch system worked fine. When I got to hills, it just downshifted into a lower gear, and I just went right up. It just drove fine anywhere I pointed it. So I decided it was time to start giving out rides. Pretty soon we had to switch, and then I was the one getting a ride. Even with two people and a first-time driver, it just went wherever you pointed it. And then I lost my ride. Eventually I got it back and decided to start doing some camera angles for you. I had limited success. Decided to try holding the camera with my foot.
This will be an interesting shot.
Getting the shot I wanted didn't work, but the machine did. Even after all my attempts, it just kept going and going fine. No problems.
That was where the camera ended up. It's a good thing GoPros are durable.
Until I had a problem.
The clutch opened up all the way and got the belt hopped on top of it. I'm gonna have to move the engine forward just a little bit. So I'll make that adjustment eventually. Right now we gotta get this clutch freed up. Talk about the right tool for the job. Let's just put this right in this cooling fluid. This is a clutch that was rusted solid and I freed up. I think it might still be a little sticky. So another thing I can work on a little bit once it cools down. Well, the clutch was hot, but the engine's not. I mean, it's warm. I don't want to hold my hand any longer than that, but it's not burning hot. So that cooling duct is doing its work. Well, now that it's cold, slides easy. So I think the problem is I just didn't get all the rust out. Might just free up with use. Maybe I should do some more testing. This chain loosened up a bit after a while, but it also was rusty when I put it on. So it might be just it knocked the rust loose and that's what length it should have been. But I got an adjustment, so let's take that up. Just a little bit of slack now. That should be fine. Because those clutches could close up and the belt pop up, I wanted to get the motor forward a little bit. There is one thing I forgot to take into account. When I built this exhaust, I attached the brace to the chassis. By loosening those bolts, I was able to rotate it slightly, but my bracket doesn't line up anymore. There. I had to bend it to make it go back in place. If you ever do something like this, remember the motor might have to move, so all your little brackets have to have slots or some adjustment on them too. Luckily, this air intake is mounted to the engine only. These elbows can rotate, so I can actually change that outlet position a little bit by rotating those. So I'm okay with that. Now we got the belt nice and tight. It'll just barely slip normally. That should help with that overrunning problem. It should never get to the point where it can get on top. The carb still seemed a little lean, so we're going to jet that up a little bit too. When I bought this carburetor, I made sure I got the jets with it because I knew I was going to have a lot of altitude changes. That's it for this video. I'm calling this one another win because this thing works pretty good. With the low gearing, it goes great up hills. It doesn't really stop for anything. I'm sure it wouldn't do deep powder well, but for most snow, it'll be fine. This whole thing was pretty cheap. It could be replicated pretty cheap too. I've seen a lot of non-running snowmobiles that are really inexpensive. Those engines, the pull start versions, if you have a coupon, they're like $100. The whole clutch drive system, those are pretty cheap too. And if you're watching this channel, you probably have some of this stuff lying around already. So you could go ahead and put it to good use. I need to do a little more testing, so I know I'm going to be having fun. I hope you are too. We'll see you next time. If you were wondering what the background noise was, that's it.